Losing Jordan was tough. And, you know, it wasn't until actually after the deployment, probably and then years later, like I think we all felt it. But because my last 3 deployments, we took KIAs on, you know, it sucked. Like, and it was quick too. Afghanistan, the first like 2 weeks, one of our grunts got killed. It's stupid. And it's never a good time, you know, obviously. But so that really doesn't bug me. What told me to start getting out was because this kind of led to whole, like, my mental, like, where I got on my warrior monk journey was, the missions got progressively scarier for me because we were flying and, you know, I'd never worked with, a lot with special operations, but we did a couple special operations support stuff. And it went fine. It's just like, you know, just the stress of being around those guys, you don't want to screw up or whatnot. But you know, we had a couple incidents with the aircraft where, and I don't want, like, Ospreys great, but I really thought, okay, this is it. There was a few times over there where a prolonged period where we were really in bad guy country and the airplane was failing, and it was either, and this is when, remember, they had caught that one kid out of Jordan and burned him in that cage or whatnot. We're flying back, essentially on a milk run, but we're still in bad guy country, and there's 4 of us on the airplane. One of us is a female, or one of them is a female. We're not going to allow ourselves to be taken alive, that kind of stuff, you know. And I'm not going to say we had that conversation, but we had that conversation. So that event specifically is what spooked me the most, because years later, when I went into the VA and they put me through a PTSD clinic, which I don't think I have PTSD, but the training and the talking we helped, that specific incident, when, like, really, it just triggered me, because I was just like, this is what people think about before they die. And that was weird.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this. How did Jiu Jitsu World Leagues go for you?
Oh, wow. I got smashed. But it's so, everybody wants to be like, hey, I learned something. You definitely learn something every time. But here's what I've learned about being a purple belt. The waters are deep. You know, coming up, like, you know, as a white and blue belt, I've already seen, you know, the judo black belts, occasional D1 wrestler. But in purple belt, now you have people that have been doing jiu-jitsu for a while. So I ran into a couple guys I knew from last year, a little younger. They're ultra heavyweights. I'm a natural super heavyweight. So had a good match. Just made technical errors in both. They punished me for it and didn't give it back. So they were good. So I like Jiu-Jitsu World League. I do mostly IBJJF, but as far as the ones that are like local areas, they probably do the best one.
I saw you down there. But with the way their layout was, you know, so you were inside the rails, obviously, but you were in your zone because you had your headphones on and you were, you know, doing your laps around and checking in on your other teammates.
Oh, yeah.
But hanging out as a spectator, because I went down to see a couple people from my studio at the rail level, you couldn't see anything.
No.
So I was there one time and you were a little ways down, but I think with your headphones on, you didn't hear me. So I went back up higher elevation, just to at least be able to see the matches, because staying down at ground level it was pointless.
No, right outside that gate. That's why. The way I do it typically is I'll go, because I end up competing like 2 or 3. So I'll go there, do get my matches done, and then we'll inevitably have some ATOS people going. So as soon as I'm done with that, I'll go get the coach's band so I can stay inside of there. And that's probably where you saw me, where I was just in my rash guard running from match to match.
Oh, okay.
Because we had, you know, at that point, some of our master white and blue belts were going at the same time.
Got it.
It was good. Everybody had a good time.
So let's take it back for everybody, for young Rick or Ricky. Do you go by Rick or Ricky?
Ricky.
Where's hometown for you? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Sacramento, California, specifically Rancho Cordova. It's right next to Folsom.
For anybody listening in law enforcement from California, it's very popular because a lot of the training classes get run up in Rancho Cordova. Oh, I know I've been to an armful of, yeah. So there's that little, I call it a hotel circle, but it's more like a hotel half shoe, and all the hotels in that little street. And it's, you know, where we get staged, and then there's classrooms in and around the area.
It might be over, because Mather Air Force Base used to be over there, so that might be the training facility. It doesn't surprise me. A lot of Sacramento sheriffs run around there too.
Growing up, what was your life like? What kept you busy?
Well, so I grew up just a suburban kid. I was growing up Grew up with my mom and my stepfather in Rancho Cordova. Essentially went to, junior high and high school there. And then nothing too crazy. I wasn't played some sports. I was never really good at too bunch of stuff. I was not a disciplined kid. And so essentially, and I was always smart, but I never thought about going to college. Nobody in my family really ever went to school. So when about 6 months before I graduated high school, I decided, hey, the Marine Corps sounds pretty interesting. And I didn't join it just on a whim. I wanted the Marine Corps always interested me, and I wanted to be aviation, and they were able to give me both. So in terms of growing up, really not, nothing too crazy. Just, went through, junior to senior year, and then graduated. And 2 weeks after I graduated, well, actually 3 weeks after I graduated high school, I was in recruit training. So it was pretty fast.
So you did the delayed entry then while you were still in high school?
Right. So I think if I remember correctly, I joined in December of '89, and then I was in boot camp in July of 1990.
You have brothers, sisters?
Excuse me.
No, you're good. Brothers, sisters?
I do. I have one older sister, 2 years older than me. She lives in LA. And in terms of family, my mother passed away in 2012. Not really sure what's up with my dad. I don't really speak to him. But yeah, so family-wise, I had a really small family. And then once my mom kind of passed away, that was the blood family kind of went away. And then as we all know, we got friends that are family now kind of thing.
Yeah. Start spreading out and making distance between everybody.
Yep.
Did you have military in your family, or that was a kind of a guiding light for you?
No, not at all. I never really thought about this too much until late, after many years. But yeah, I was the first person in my family to go, join the military. Just really, I don't want to say like my family was like uneventful or whatnot, but I look back at my past, like nobody was really doing anything too crazy or whatnot. So I was the first one I knew I wanted to go, and I knew I wanted to leave home and do things. So I did have that thirst. And I think I was the first person kind of in a few generations to want to do that.
When you mentioned aviation, was your intent to fly or from the mechanical side of it? Well,
honestly, I didn't, because I thought things were so unattainable. I didn't really you think about pilots and whatnot, and you think about how, I could never be doing that. So I remember, as a young kid, I would draw pictures, and it would be like war pictures, and it would be like little tanks and stuff. But I would always draw airplanes flying in, but I was always the engineering part of it. So when I joined the military, I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic. So that's exactly what they let me do for a bunch of years. And then eventually I became an engineering officer and a flyer and whatnot. But yeah, I knew that I wanted to be, it's strange. I knew I wanted to do aviation, but I wasn't, even if I would have been college bound or whatnot, I don't think, well, put it this way, I know a lot of pilots. I wasn't, my passion wasn't flying. I think I would have been an okay pilot or whatnot. I like to be in combat aircrew, but being an engineering officer and, managing the maintenance department and fixing airplanes, that's really what my talent was and my passion. So I got to do exactly that.
Would you consider yourself mechanically inclined even as a young kid?
Not at all. I would consider myself mechanically declined. Like I remember a couple, 3 friends from high school that were still really close. One of them, he's a master mechanic for Ford now, but I remember in high school, he's, working on his car and whatnot. And we were doing the brakes one day, and it didn't occur to me. I'm looking right at it, how we're supposed to put it back together. And he's looking at me, he's like, Ricky, why can't, and so what I realized at that point, I didn't have a learning disability or anything, but the way I looked at things or the way I was processing information, it wasn't correct. And I think that's like when I went into the Marine Corps and went through the naval aviation schools and whatnot, I took to it a little bit because, they do a good job of teaching and breaking it down. And so when it was taught to me in that format, I was able to pick it up. But yeah, I was I was not mechanically inclined probably until a couple of years after in the Corps. And then I got pretty good quickly because it was interesting because now that I knew I could do it, I really wanted to get good at it. And I worked on F-18s for about 17 years. So.
Was it something though, was there ever that initial step off when you first started where like, man, I'm just not grasping this?
Not really, because so when anybody's ever been in the military, you go to recruit training, finished, a couple, 3 months later, went to Marine combat training, blah, blah, blah. And then for all of us aviation guys, and girls go down back in the day, Millington, Tennessee. So it's a pipeline. So you're just going from school to school. So there was never a time I was in school where I was like, oh, I'm going to fail or whatnot. It's competitive and you're talking crap to your friends or what you want to do well. But no, I never got a point where I didn't think I wasn't going to do well with it. I will say this, because initially we had, different jobs. So I was a metal shop composite guy to begin with. And then, but our 2 MOSs or jobs were separated. The hydraulics guys, flight controls, landing gear. They combined those two about 3 years into my career as a corporal. So I had to learn hydraulics, advanced flight controls, and all that stuff on the fly. So, and it's funny because once they combine it, if you're already
here's a book, go learn it.
Essentially, that's kind of what happened. Because if you're already qualified in all this, you expect to be that, and our ego took over and whatnot. But because I had, learned how to learn and got good at this, but for example, I can look at a map and, like see fingers and draws and whatever else. But when I looked at a schematic, it just didn't make sense because I wasn't like, but if we want to talk about metal or composites, I was there. So I remember it took about a year. I mean, that wasn't that uncomfortable. But I just remember going out to the airplane and being like, you're trying to troubleshoot it, trying to fix it. And you're working with, so these other guys that were hydraulics men had to learn the metal shop stuff. So we were teaching each other, we knew each other. And we would mess with each other a little bit, but the point is there,
No.
Yeah, exactly. But, but you learned, but it was probably about a year it took me. And then once you just, the F-18 was very well built. It's the Legacy Hornet's what I'm talking about. It's, great airplane. And once you learn how that airplane works, not only from the book side of the house, but it's, quirks and whatnot, it's a fun bird to work on.
And you mentioned college for the aviation in the sense of pilot aspect. Was college never on your radar growing up?
No, not really, because nobody in my parents, I was more of a blue collar family. And I remember my father, I'm not going to disparage him, but very famously told me one time, because I remember being in just talking about school or whatnot, but he was the kind of guy that's like, if he didn't do it, nobody needed to do it. And you run into those kind of people and you're like, oh my God. So it was never, so I think it was put in my head early on, hey, you're not going to do that. So I just didn't think about it. But fortunately, my first duty station was in Hawaii. I worked for some a couple really smart staff sergeants, one of which was, because you never really saw a lot of enlisted people with their undergrads back then, but he actually finished his undergrad as a staff sergeant, which was unheard of. So I took my first college class about a year and a half in the Corps, and it took me 9 years to finish my first degree. But it's like, it is what it is. So it wasn't. I'm not going to say it wasn't in the cards, but I didn't think about it because it was never put on my radar. But once I got into the Corps and I started working around, I was around real jet fighter pilots that were great. The kind of guys, well, girls now too, but guys that went to the Naval Academy on a football scholarship or got an aeronautical engineering degree while they were there, and blah blah blah, and they're just Captain America, and they're great guys. You see people like that, and you're like, that's wow. And then you realize that, just really what it comes down to is discipline and do you want it, So, yeah.
You went in 1990?
1990.
Going in, were you thinking career at the front end?
No, not at all. I didn't really, I was 18. I mean, I think back to how dumb I was. I can't even remember. I can't even believe I found my way to boot camp. But no, it's like, no, I didn't start thinking about the career aspect of it until I re-enlisted for the second time. I was my first part of my career was great. I mean, it was all great, but after I finished school, got stationed in Hawaii for 3 years. We did 3 West Pacific deployments, UDP program back in the day. You'd go to Japan, fly around with our airplanes, but you live in Hawaii, and then you pack your airplanes up for 6-7 months. You go to Japan, Australia. I was living the dream. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could, but and I will say this though, it was a lot of work. I mean, there was. Yeah, everybody in the Marine Corps works. However, aviation people, we work 2 shifts and we work six days a week, and it's always like it takes a lot of work, especially nowadays, to keep the airplanes up and running. So I learned how to work real hard, really hard, and somewhat efficiently. But those first 3 or 4 deployments overseas were amazing. It was just fun,
Did you end up spending your entire career basically on the West Coast in Hawaii? Before I was when I became an officer, I had to go to Quantico. So yes, I was in Hawaii and then came to the West Coast. We were up in a place called El Toro for a while up in Orange County. And then in 1998, the Marine Corps took back over Miramar Air Station. And then, so cumulatively, I was on, the West Coast of Hawaii for like 20 years other than deployments. Well, a little bit less than that. And then in 2008, when I went to Quantico to basic school, after that, I was stationed in a place called New River, North Carolina, which is about 3 hours away from Fayetteville, out there and stuff. But it's near our Camp Lejeune. For anybody who doesn't know, when we have our Marine bases, we have our grunt bases our air bases near Navy bases for obvious reasons. But no, it was great. I did all my time out here, but I'm glad that I got to be stationed on the East Coast. I would never want to live there, and not because I hate it, but because to live on the East Coast, I think you have to, grow up there first because the weather's crazy. But living out in North Carolina and like just seeing how the South was and being up and down the coastline and seeing that part of the country's history, that was a lot of fun. And then I got to
got to do some pretty cool deployments out of there as well. So
now, am I understanding correctly? You got the opportunity of the officer candidate route?
Yeah. So I went the warrant officer program. So for 17 years, I was got up to gunnery sergeant, which is an E7. And then I applied for and was accepted for the warrant officer program. And then essentially the way it works for us is, I mean, everybody has their own kind of officer programs, but for our warrant officers, we're attached to a specific job. And then like what we're doing, we're termed subject matter experts. So what I did was I went from being an aircraft mechanic and and at that point, senior maintenance manager, things like that, a bunch of qualifications, to being the maintenance officer for the squadron. So your job is technically aviation engineering officer. Your job is to help the aircraft maintenance officer, who's a pilot major, run the maintenance department, and would work with other like senior enlisted and officers in the maintenance department to fix all of your airplanes. And it's the most intense job I've ever had in my life. But and I also became combat aircrew at the same time, which was awesome because I got the opportunity to fly. But it was all of the experience and training I had as an enlisted person, being on, for example, a general's inspection team, and then being a senior enlisted person in a couple squadrons for that. So I felt very trained and ready for it. But when I actually became like the maintenance officer and then took the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit out, and we all went kinetic in Afghanistan, like I was just like, okay.
It just got real.
Yeah, and I absolutely am so grateful for those opportunities. It was awesome.
With making that transition at the 17-year mark, does the Marine Corps require then a longer enlistment related to that, or does...
No, so it's interesting, like, because when you're essentially discharged from the Marine Corps, and then warrant officers are appointed, and then we become commissioned. It's just the process for us. Whereas, for example, if I was the second lieutenant round, I would have went to officer candidate school first. We all go. All Marine officers are trained at Quantico by our enlisted Marines. It's one of the things that we make proud of ourselves. And so we all go to the basic school. But if you're a second lieutenant, you'll go to an officer candidate school. Is not officer boot camp, but essentially, in this can be. Because all warrant officers come from the fleet, a lot of our gas chamber, are all of the type of training that needs to be done that they need to teach lieutenants we already know. So we just get there kind of differently, and then we meld and then just kind of go. But you're not required for warrant officers. You're not required to like incur any more follow-on service. I wouldn't switch over at 17 years and then get out at 19. So it's not even like a. Well, put it this way. Once you become a warrant officer, you're on probation for 36 months. So that you do not really owe that time to the Marine Corps, but at any given time, they could say, hey, we don't think you're making it as a warrant officer. We're going to go ahead and take those ranks off. And you may, and one or two things happen. You might revert back to your enlisted rank, or they may just kick you out. They do this because people at that late date maybe been doing things for a while and gotten caught, and then they put that shiny bar on and they do it again. And we do. This is one good thing about the Marine Corps is, I mean, we have high standards for our enlisted and our officers and whatnot, but I can honestly tell you this, 17 years enlisted, I watched some people probably get away with some things they shouldn't have, whatever else. I've never seen an officer get away with anything, and I'm proud of that, because especially if it's exposed, because if you don't hold that standard, it doesn't matter, so.
Going into OCS or officer training but for the warrant program, so you're coming in with a lot of experience.
Yeah.
Do they leave you alone, or do they kind of mess with you even more?
Well, it's a training process. So here's how it works. So the basic school, or TBS, is 4 months for warrant officers and 6 months for lieutenants. The only difference being is, like I said, if you're coming from the fleet, I was already qualified with my rifle, my pistol. You have to be, like, swim qual. So there's, say, 6 to 8 weeks of training that the lieutenants have to go through that we're already go. So you can cut that off. All the rest of the training is the same. So like I said, all Marine Corps officers train the same, which is cool for us, except TBS is designed for a 22-year-old lieutenant, not a 36-year-old gunnery sergeant. And though I'm kind of an athlete nowadays, I wasn't really TBS was a challenge. It's the hardest school I've ever been to. There were several, unfortunately, started with I think 252 warrant officers. We might have graduated 230. Some people got dropped for, we call it honor violations. I don't know why you'd go there and cheat, but they did. But the vast majority of them just got hurt. And they have an opportunity to come back, but you have to finish TBS, and you have 3 times to do it. So if you get hurt every time, what I like about that too, it sucks, but I mean, it sucks for people that can't make it, but the standards are always held. So all Marines officers are trained the same. We're trained by enlisted Marines. And like I said, leave alone wise, it's a curriculum. So every day you're going to school, you're being taught. there isn't as much hazing, or okay, so there's a difference. If you have a room full of warrant officers and you're a captain, right, you're going to be speaking to us a little different, just because, you know, it's kind of like, you know, almost a peer-to-peer relationship. It is a peer-to-peer relationship. Whereas if they're a bunch of second lieutenants, and it's funny because you do a lot of training there, and land nav was one of them. I failed one of the land nav events. I got completely lost. The only thing I found that day was like my escape azimuth. I almost popped off my flare. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I had to go remediate that weekend. There's a bunch of warrant officers that dropped or failed. So there's like 30 of us, and there's probably another 30 or 40 lieutenants on the other side, because they're always whatever. The captain's in there. One of the warrant officers asked a question, raised his hand, and the captain's like, "Yeah, what do you got?" And he answered like all conversationally. And then like 30 seconds later, the lieutenant, and the guy's like, whatever else. He's like, "Stand up when you're talking to me." And it was just, and I think there's a reason they do that. Warrant officers, we are our own problem, meaning that we just have to be left our own device. Because if when you have 250 subject matter experts in the same room, stand by. So it's like we don't even need to be messed with, because we're going to be doing it to ourselves. Whereas the young officers have to understand that there is a hierarchy, and you gotta know when to talk and when not to, because this isn't disrespectful to anybody, but if there's a bunch of senior officers in the room and they're trying to make a decision, and you're over there just chirping away, that's just not smart.
Sometimes the smartest one in the room is the one who stays the most quiet. Yeah.
So, but anyway, as far as like mess with, the basic school was very well ran. You learn a lot. I still learn. I mean, there's a bunch of grunt stuff that I learned there. I mean, you shoot a cannon, and we're walking around with C4 in our pockets. We're blowing off claymores. I mean, it was a lot more training than I ever expected. And then I went back to the air wing, and I was like, "Hey, now I know how to set up an ambush. Let's go."
Gonna come in handy from the air.
Well, actually, it's funny because when I started flying, especially when we started getting hot and heavy in Afghanistan, and then my last deployment, we were flying. We went back to Iraq because the whole ISIS thing kicked up, so we were flying in Iraq and into Syria. Understanding, like, you know, just how people call for fire, like, because you're hearing a lot of radio stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on the ground, and having just a better understanding of the tactics that are happening. That TBS really taught me that, which was cool.
Isn't that basically the concept? I believe it's a JTAC officer. They take a pilot out of the plane and put them on the ground and teach them how to call in.
So a JTAC is a little different. So that's a FAC, a forward air controller. Typically, a JTAC is a special forces person. I mean, don't get me wrong. A JTAC is a qualification, and pilots can absolutely do that. Typically, a JTAC, and some of my operator buddies are like, "Don't screw this up." But like you have, for example, Air Force combat controllers are famous for this. They're like, you know, I call them Air Force Green Berets. No offense to because that's what they are. They have all of the same training all the other operators do, but then they're like, they can call in all kinds of stuff. For Marine Corps pilots, maybe the other services, but specifically, typically all pilots, after they're done, you know, they fly for a little bit. They're a captain for a while. They've done a couple deployments. At that point, they're going to probably do a non-flying tour. A lot of them go to the FAC. So they'll go from right from Miramar right up to Camp Pendleton to be a FAC for 2-5 or whatever. And then back in the day, especially with Iraq, they would deploy with them. But that type of stuff they learn. They really, was actually pretty cool. The Marine Corps was the first group to do that in World War II, because they just got to the point where they're tired of dropping on their own people, so they just crawl. The pilots would crawl up to fly, and they're thinking about it. Marines are the only ones that think to do this. Pilots are going to crawl out there with the grunts, look at what's going on, and then go back,
get in the plane,
and then figure it out. So it was, forward air controllers, man. Anybody who calls for fire knows what they're doing. They're pretty talented.
So you ended up coming out in 2015 to 25 years.
Yep, 1 month, 25 years, 1 month.
Why not go to 30 at that point?
Well, good question. So I was actually scheduled to retire before that. Long story short, so I was on the East Coast. I'd done my 9th deployment, came home from Afghanistan, and my mother got sick. This is late 2011. Yeah, she passed in 12. Anyway, so I was kind of getting close I was getting long in the tooth. I mean, I wasn't married. I didn't have children. I was financially, I had already accomplished the goals in terms of what I needed to accomplish to transition and be successful in terms of whatever. And then my mom and I were very, very close. So we were, planning on doing stuff or whatnot. And I come back, and then she unfortunately got diagnosed with cancer, and it was very, very short turnaround time. So she passed early 12. I was back in Sacramento for about 2 months, just taking care of that. Went back to New River, and I was just like, I think I got to retire, but at that point I was just in a fog. but had a lot of good friends in the Marine Corps, mentors and whatnot. So my old boss was working at headquarters Marine Corps, and he was like, my call sign was Leroy in the Marine Corps. So he was like, hey, Leroy, tell you what, they're standing the Osprey program. I'm a V-22 Osprey guy. I was kind of with the, I was with the program when it was kind of first standing up, was first few days of, or first few years of deploying and whatnot. So he's like, hey, go out to the West Coast, take orders out there, help one of the squadrons stand up, kind of figure it out. So I did that, took my orders, came out to the West Coast, and this is in 2012. And because at that point, when the Marine Corps adopts a new aircraft like the V-22, it phases out the old airplane, puts in the new one. We start on one coast. So the East Coast first. All the expertise for this specific airplane was out there. And then the CH-46, which was the airplane that was replacing, was sundowning on the West Coast. So I went out there and helped the second squadron stand up, and then was kind of like I don't want to call myself a subject matter expert. There's a lot of smart guys out there like me, but we're just kind of being like a cadre, so to speak, right? Didn't the V-22, though, have a lot of problems initially? Yeah. So I'll speak to that real quick, because here's the thing with that. The V-22 is like the space shuttle. They have this great book by Richard Whittle called The Notorious Dream Machine. The Dream Machine, Notorious Story of the Osprey. It needs flight control computers to work, just like the space shuttle. So it wasn't even conceptual until that. Then it got to a point where a lot of people wanted the airplane. A lot of people, like Dick Cheney, didn't, famously. And then you have industry and the military fight in between. It's such an interesting airplane because it flies like an airplane but can land like a helicopter. For example, that's why all helicopters have, the collective. They pull up, but that's how they're flown, blah, blah, blah. Well, a V-22 actually has almost like a traditional throttle, because at the time that they were designing the throttle quadrant of the V-22, a jet guy was in charge of the program office. The next guy was a helicopter dude. So it was like that kind of mess. And if you read this book, you're like, how that? And then, unfortunately, we killed a lot of good people along the way because they were forcing flights when they didn't need to fly. Those decisions were made at the squadron and higher level. And I'm not going to not blame the airplane. There were some problems, but if you really look at all of them, out of the 3 really bad fatalities, the airplane was pushed to fail, and it was telling everybody, don't fly me right now. And so some bad decisions were made. And I'm not making an excuse. Everybody knows what happened, but I'm going to tell you right now, we, at this point, probably have 1 million operational, because we were at 500,000 flight operational hours. And I have hundreds of hours on this airplane. Trust me, if you have a pilot up front trying to crash, that airplane will fight you all the way to the ground. That thing has saved us quite a bit after even taking damage and all kinds of stuff.
Well, you bring up a good point. Is in its initial inception, you just unfortunately had too many hands in the pot trying to control.
Yeah.
Or not necessarily too many hands, but the wrong people giving input. Like I said, a pilot's giving input on a throttle where it's timed for it to start acting like a helicopter.
Exactly. And the other part too, and it's just unfortunate because if you think about it, a lot of the services fly the same airplane, but there was a lot of services involved that they backed out. So and it was elongated and all these things. They were supposedly going to field the Osprey in the late 80s, and then obviously, so there was. I'm just going to say a lot of bad decisions made by industry, by government, and by some individuals, and some, and you're not going to be in the Osprey community, especially back when I was in it, and not lose friends. So we just leave it where it's at,
Got it. So your mom passes away in 2012. You were already kind of thinking about getting out at that point, but basically nothing really else to drive you out, so you stayed in.
Well, not necessarily, sort of. Well, okay, so I came out here, and I was happier. I mean, my mom had passed, and so I just had as the trustee of the estate and whatnot, and like I was just, I got clear, so I was I started, I had stopped training for a while, got back into it, so I was, whatever else, and I was back in San Diego as a single off. I was having a good time. So, and I was starting to get happy again, but towards the end of. So I was in the squadron for 2012. So I spent about 1.5 years with VMM 163, the Evil Eyes. They're one of the most storied squadrons in the Marine Corps. Famously have eyes painted on the airplanes. They're cool. So I transitioned over, and then I was just I went up and talked to the CO one day. I'm like, boss, I got to go home. I'm done. And he's like, I understand. And he was cool with it because he knew I was coming to that. And what was interesting was because this leads to my last deployment, which was kind of like I'll get to that point. But so there was another squadron standing up, VMM 363. So a buddy of mine who's another warrant officer, he wants to go on my deployment. And so he, jokingly asked me one day, I'm like, his name's Curtis. He just retired, actually. I went to his retirement about 3 months ago. He goes, hey, you want to switch? And I'm like, if you're serious, yeah, because I'm going to retire and I'd rather you, because he was a solid guy. He was a really good maintenance officer. And because I end up beating him overseas. So we switch. I go to 363. I tell the CO, we all go by call signs, but Zorro's a call sign. I'm like, hey, I'll be here for like 6 8. Because we don't know each other, but we know each other through reputation because the Osprey community was kind of close knit. So I just went into this office. I was like, hey, I'm going to be here for about, I think it was at that point, maybe like 10 months left. But I was like, I'm going to live here in San Diego. I'm not going to be like checking it in. So we'll build this to what it. I wanted to do the same thing for 363 I did for 163 and set them up for success, because why else would you work? And I was still flying. It was great. And then these guys named ISIS popped their little heads up in Iraq. This is in 2013. And then so we're going into latter part of 13 into 14, and the rumblings going around. The squadron I left was part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit that was already deploying, so they were already pushing. My squadron got tasked to go take the airplanes that were in Afghanistan, take them back into Kuwait, reopen the base that we used to have, because we never leave that stuff, and then start flying missions back to stuff we were doing like 6 years ago. So it was like Iraq part 13. I don't know. Here's the funny part. So as soon as this all happened real quick, and the squadron I was at, 363, they did a great job, but 82% of the squadron had never deployed. Myself, my boss, there was 3 pilots, me, and like 3 other crew chiefs that had ever flown any combat missions in the squadron at all. I mean, even though we've been at war forever, everybody got out, Right. So anyway, and the kids did great. I shouldn't call them kids. Everybody did great. The problem was we were kind of understaffed. So as a maintenance officer, it's typically I wouldn't fly. In fact, it's kind of frowned upon at times because it can take away from your other job. I never let it, and my performance speaks for itself. But fortunately, since I was fully qualified and I'd already flown, I'd already was qualified aircrew, flown combat missions in in Afghanistan and whatnot. We did not have enough crew chiefs to man the airplanes. We had barely enough pilots. So when we went overseas, we were already deficit, I think, 2 actual combat crews. And then we got 2 brand new kids from school, but they weren't qualified to fly at night yet, because to fly in airplanes, there's all these qualifications, right? So they were basically useless to us. So with me, we had just enough people to man the missions. No kidding, show up in Kuwait. We got the guys in 264, my buddies, and sent us these airplanes. They did a great job. These airplanes were beat up from Afghanistan, but they did a fantastic job of prepping for us and really working hard. And Billy and all those guys did a great job. We get the airplanes, and like 48 hours later, we're flying FAM missions, and we're already set alert. We're setting alert the alerts are already set as the grunts are moving into tents. and don't get me wrong, the military knows what they're doing or whatnot, but this is what fast, rapid deploying looks like. I was blown away that we were doing all this with like very, very little experience. And, we didn't screw anything up. It was fun.
That's a success.
Yeah. No, yeah. We, unfortunately, and I'll talk to this real quick, because we had a fatality, because when I left the Corps, I worked with this organization called the Wingman Foundation for about almost 5 years. And
I want to get into that. So,
but true. Okay. So, but I will say this: with that, unfortunately, with 163, we had this kid named Jordan Spears, crew chief. I flew him a bunch of times. Well, I flew with everybody in 163. They're out circling the ocean. We're sitting in Kuwait. We're only a week into it. Bad guys are starting to mess with the embassy up in Baghdad, so we're doing a Baghdad embassy compound reinforcement. So we're going to put a bunch of grunts in about 6 airplanes and just land all at once, because as everybody knows, you want to put everybody on the ground at once and just push everybody out. So we were getting ready to fly the missions, and one of the airplanes lifted off the boat. There was just a crew in it, fortunately, because they were coming to Kuwait to pick people up, and then we were going to join them. Airplane power settled in the water. They fought it, and then they had the 2 crew chiefs in the back, John Logan and Jordan Spears, jump out the back. And unfortunately, Jordan couldn't inflate his tube. He drowned. John Logan was picked up by a Starbird. Their pilots fought it the whole time. We were able to recover the airplane and put it aboard it. But that started our deployment, and it sucked. But it set the tone for like, we're not losing anything else. So I think that right there, even though I was very much attached to that squadron, I flew with everybody, and that I knew everybody there. But even though my new squadron was a sister squadron, we took that on, like, we all took an L that day,
Right. Was that kind of the beginning of the end for you? I mean, was that kind of a catalyst to say, this is my time to start thinking about it? As soon as this deployment's done, I'm out?
Well, I was already scheduled. So, okay. Yeah. I'd already been approved for retirement. So when my new squadron got tacked to go or whatnot, headquarters Marine Corps just extended it out. So when I was coming home, I was going to retire anyway. So that was already set for me. Losing Jordan was tough. And, you know, it wasn't until actually after the deployment, probably and then years later, like I think we all felt it. But because my last 3 deployments, we took KIAs on, you know, it sucked. Like, and it was quick too. Afghanistan, the first like 2 weeks, one of our grunts got killed. Stupid. And it's never a good time, you know, obviously. But so that really doesn't bug me. What told me to start getting out was because this kind of led to whole like my mental, like where I got on my warrior monk journey was the missions got progressively scarier for me because we were flying and, you know, I'd never worked with a lot with special operations, but we did a couple special operations support stuff. And it went fine. It's just like, you know, just the stress of being around those guys, you don't want to screw up or whatnot. But you know, we had a couple incidents with the aircraft where, and I don't want, like, Ospreys great, but I really thought, okay, this is it. There was a few times over there where a prolonged period where we were really in bad guy country and the airplane was failing, and it was either, and this is when, remember, they had caught that one kid out of Jordan and burned him in that cage or whatnot. We're flying back, essentially on a milk run, but we're still in bad guy country, and there's 4 of us on the airplane. One of us is a female, or one of them is a female. We're not going to allow ourselves to be taken alive, that kind of stuff, you know. And I'm not going to say we had that conversation, but we had that conversation. So that event specifically is what spooked me the most, because years later, when I went into the VA and they put me through a PTSD clinic, which I don't think I have PTSD, but the training and the talking we helped, that specific incident, when like really, it just triggered me, because I was just like, this is what people think about before they die. And that was weird.
Right. So heading out 2015, did you have a plan for post-military life?
Yeah. So I did. That's the part I did really well, because I worked for a lot of smart people, and people gave enough a carrot. I was always, even when I was being an idiot, I was always all in. So meaning that, like, you know, that I would work hard. So people have really said, hey, you need to, you know, do this, that, and the other. So education was number 1. And then number 2 was just financial stuff. And it's like, just start saving early on. So I had my first, I started my IRA when I was like 20 or something like that. And I've always been interested in, I mean, I've never been like Mr. Day Trader or whatnot, but I understood early on that it really, you know, like the compound interest thing or whatnot. So I wasn't exactly financially independent when I left. I mean, not to the point I am now. When I left the Corps, I knew I was going to take, you know, some time off. When I was 25 years, 10 deployments. I was a little edgy. So I went back.
I need a break.
A little break. But I went back to school, did all Billy Madison style, went to college for a year and a half. And I, you know, I was able to support myself because of, you know, my GI Bill and whatnot, without taking away from my, like, nest egg, so to speak. And then I knew I was going to work, because I worked for 3 years after that in aerospace and made a great amount. What that did was solidify, like, my wealth bubble, so to speak. So now I just pay myself to train and fight. So I'm able to be financially independent. But I did have a plan coming out, and then I guess modularly it worked out.
So there's 2 avenues I want to go down. One, I want to get to the Wingman Foundation.
Okay.
But so going back to school after you came out, did you have a specific plan, or was it just, I just want to go back to college?
Yeah, well, so I didn't. I wanted to use my GI Bill, and I had a technical degree, I had an aviation maintenance technology degree, but I didn't necessarily need the degree for what I was going to go into. Excuse me, because there's a lot of jobs for people like me that, with the already degree I have and the experience, specifically the one that I took. But I wanted to learn, you know, and I knew that. I also knew, we talk about this transition thing, I knew I was institutionalized, and I knew I had to relearn how to be a civilian or whatnot. And I figured that was the best way possible. And I really just dove into it. I mean, like, from my retirement ceremony, and I mean, I always wear, like, you know, flip-flops and shorts and whatnot. But I went from, like, wearing a flight suit and, like, being in charge every day to being like Billy Madison drive. I still had my Corvette before my Tesla. It was great. But I do very, very specifically remember not being able to unwind. As much as I wanted to have fun in class, it was still very irritating to me. And I knew that was my problem. But yeah, so I didn't want to, so yes, I wanted to be educated, but not for any specific reason. But I've always been interested in not so much finance, but the economic side. So I just got a bachelor's of science in organizational leadership, which was really, I mean, that's like Marine Officer 101, and then a minor in economics. So it was cool.
And you ended up actually in Texas for a while working with Bell Helicopters?
No. So at the end of 2019, This is kind of when my mind starts to fail, and I'm just like, man, easy things are becoming hard. So I was interested in moving to Texas because just Arlington area, I was just, if I was going to live anywhere else, that could possibly be it. And I was at that point, I wasn't happy. I mean, I wasn't like suicide ideation or whatever else or punching walls, but I was just like, man. So I moved out there. I was kind of traveling back and forth working at Miramar, and then I moved out there for a number of months to see if I could live there. And I love Texas. I mean, I'm going to go back there actually in 2 weeks or whatnot. But it got to a point where I wasn't any happier out there. I looked at Bell Helicopter as a job opportunity or whatnot, but I already had a good job at Miramar and I wasn't happy. So I thought that the location was going to change and I just knew it wasn't. And then I started doing jiu-jitsu while I was out there. And I'm going to go back and see these guys, but they're great because one of them just famously goes, let me get this straight. You just came here from San Diego and you started doing jiu-jitsu. You need to go back to San Diego. So that's why I didn't even know who ATOS was at the time or whatnot. So I remember I decided, okay, Texas isn't it. I got my boots. I'm going to come back here once in a while, but I need to go back to San Diego. And then at that point I decided that because I wanted to fix my head, I knew jiu-jitsu was going to help me with that. And I wanted to train at the best place I could. And ATOS just happened to be right there.
So I guess what I'm getting at then is you actually did the contractor route, though, for a little while.
3 years, yep.
As far as what advice can you give to somebody who's going to potentially think about that avenue coming out of the Marine Corps and going the contracting route? What are some of the cons that you experienced? Obviously, I know you bring a garbage load of experience, so it's probably relatively easy to slide right into that. But what are some of the downsides that you experienced? Somebody might not be thinking about.
Well, the biggest issues I had with it, and it was like me too, like I was a little long in the tooth to still be working around aviation. I guess you got to be careful what you get into because I was supporting the same people that I used to be at that time. And you got to realize as a contractor, you're a contractor, you're an advisor at best. And I knew that going in. Like I used to remember working around people that I respected or whatnot, but like once you take the rank off and you put a polo on, you got to like know who you are. And I was good. Like I never was like, do this or whatnot. But I remember having difficulty, convincing somebody. I'm like, cause it's like, and I hate to say it like this, but when you have a lot of experience and the person's relatively new and you see them, they're making an ego-based decision. You're like, man, this is going to be bad. And not only is this going to be bad, this is going to affect our process. Right. Because for me, I was managing, essentially just like with cars, we take airplanes out of service for like every 5 or 6 years and like, essentially take a look at them, replace a bunch of stuff. At a minimum, it's supposed to be a minimum 6 months process, usually longer, and $1 million going into it. And then it's everything since then. So people that are going to go into contracting, first and foremost, well, do your legwork or do your head work, because a lot of people, especially aviation, the job's are already waiting for you. So go out and, talk to the companies or whatnot. Also figure out like what kind of qualifications or whatever. A lot of people, I think it's important for people to go to school. I really believe in higher education. I'm not saying just go get some soft degree and spend $80 million doing it, but like there's a reason we learn critical thinking and things of that nature. So I think that people need to be a little bit more aware of not just being like, oh, well, so-and-so is going to get me a job here. But know what you're getting into, because I enjoyed my job for about 12 months and I had it for about 38 months. So I guess that's the best thing. Know what you're getting yourself into. And then also remember, you're in a transition. So while you're getting this job, it's hard for people to go from being like, I guess, one of the boys because you're not one of the boys anymore. You're now one of them. And I've seen people struggle with that.
Were you actually back with guys that you had previously?
I knew the same people. Yeah.
And they still treated you a little different.
Oh, no. I had a great relationship with them. I guess what I'm trying to say is because I worked at Miramar and then took almost 2 years off, but a lot of the people, for example, that were say corporals or sergeants when I was a chief warrant officer on the left coast, they're either staff sergeants or gunny. Some are warrant officers now. They came up behind me. Some of them they are captains now. They passed like through and so it's kind of like that. Not so much different, not as an enemy as an outsider, because I was always I really made a point of not going in and telling anybody what to do, because I've worked with contractors like that. And when I was a very bold and aggressive maintenance officer, and people knew me by reputation, so when people didn't know me, when I would meet them for the first time as a contractor, I didn't want to be like, oh, hey, let me tell you about the 10 deployments I did, blah, blah, blah. Nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
Because they're in their own fight right now, and they're battling dragons right now. My dragons are dead. They're fighting right now. So I always try to keep that in mind.
So let's talk about the Wingman Foundation. How did you become involved with it? And well, what is it? And then how did you get involved with it?
Okay. Wingman Foundation is an organization. It was founded. So Jordan Spears drowned October 1st, 2014. He's the first casualty of Operation Inherent Resolve. Inherent Resolve is the operation that took over for Iraqi freedom, blah, blah, blah. So, a guy in my squadron named Phil Duong, was one of the pilots. Him and two of his other pilot friends all got together, and they'd been talking about doing it because there was no charity or nonprofit that supported the families. I mean, obviously, when somebody dies or whatnot, there's insurance or whatnot, but there was nothing to do that. So 3 captains, this is amazing. 3 captains, just 3 regular captains. I mean, they're stellar. 2 of them went to the Naval Academy. They're all studs, you know what I'm saying? Like Phil was going to be a Green Beret, decided to be a pilot instead. Like they're those people. But so anyway, they created it. And I remember very specifically because it was probably December of 14. It was a couple months after Jordan had drowned. We're sitting in our little hooch in Kuwait because as the war's starting to back up, people are starting to come in. The Air Force is showing up with all their cool stuff, and so like we're like every day we get like a new piece to our erector set or something, right? So we're sitting in the new piece of the erector set, and this guy named, I think his last name was Haynes. He was a super smart dude. He was rewriting the not the mission statement, but like just some like all the information for it because they just filed for the
501c3.
Yeah, man, I've done this for all 501c3. Anyway, long story short, this all starts. So I know this is happening. I get out of the Marine Corps. I come back. I retire. Phil and I were roommates. I mean, I'd known him. He flew together. So I remember middle of 15, I was getting out, and I sent him an email. I was like, hey, man, because I told him, I was like, when I get out, I want to help. And it was still, like just some of their squadron buddies were helping, some whatever else. So I got involved in latter part of 15 and essentially worked the way up to like run a director of operations. And here's what the Wingman Foundation does. If a Navy, Marine, or Coast Guard aircraft has a mishap and there is either injury or loss of life, there are people that want to start. There's a lot of money, obviously, in naval aviation. So there's a lot of people want to give, and they want to help. But there was never a good avenue to go through. There's GoFundMes and whatnot. People don't really realize what that is. If you go over a certain amount, the IRS and GoFundMe has to send like I think it's 1099K. There's tax implications for all this. I'll give you an example. Jeff Coos went in 2017. He was the Blue Angel, Marine Blue Angel that crashed. His sister-in-law set up a GoFundMe, and it went over like $100,000 in like a week because it's a Blue Angel, whatever else. Bless her heart, but she had to pay taxes on that. So anyway, it gets to a point where when a mishap occurs, I mean, we had to kind of get people to know us, but after a while, then we were in with Headquarters Marine Corps and also ComNav Air Force people, and we had enough senior pilots like captains and colonel. I mean, Navy captains, Navy or Marine colonels, the 3-star general that runs Marine Air. So if an airplane goes in or whatnot, we wouldn't be like, tell us this, that, and the other. But the commanding officer would get a email from me at the time saying, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm going to be honest with you. I knew half of them. I knew, it gets to a point where after 30 mishaps, you're eventually just going to know some people that go in.
Right.
So where there was a lot of personal connection for us. So we had that in, and we were able to, I turned over operations in 20. We had raised $3.2 million at that point. And it's incredible. I mean, we're talking about that organization has been around for like 5 years. So when a mishap occurs, we would put up a website, whatever else, and our social media or whatnot would just go like fleet-wide instantaneously. And then all the money that the Wingman Foundation collects at that point, because the ticker would start running, I'm talking 100% of it. 100% of every dollar that's collected goes right to the family. 100% flow through. The operating costs for the Wingman Foundation are like 2%. So, and the way that we paid for that was from like regular general donations or whatnot. But if people donated for a mishap, we absolutely gave it, because that's important. Like nobody, right. even people would probably be like, 95 cents goes. No, because it was personal for all of us. And they've been supporting. Unfortunately, aviation is very dangerous. People do not want to crash. Things don't want to happen, but they do. So at this, I had left. I had 31 mishaps under my belt, and they've been cooking along since then. So yeah.
You mentioned ultimately ending up at the VA and getting checked out and diagnosed with PTS. What prompted you to make that step and reach out to the VA?
So, I was always like a hair on fire kind of individual. And I remember being, younger, like people would mentor me and I calmed down and I matured or whatnot, but I was always an aggressive all in kind of person. And then, so what I didn't realize was ultimately I started developing a lot of anxiety. It had to do with a lot of missions I was flying at the end. So see, like, for example, 2015, 2016 are not really a blur for me, but I was in college, I was hanging out, I was like, so it was great. And then I started working. And then from 2016 all the way to 2020, I had a full-time job, ran the Wingman Foundation, full-time single guy in San Diego, it's like doing, and I just remember very specifically, like simple things became hard. I used to be able to do math in my head, or I can do it again now, but it's just, I would stammer. I would lose words. I would go transient. Like all of them, I'm just like, I'm not that dude. So, and then I was also having disproportionate responses. I wasn't to the point where I was punching holes in walls, but I was getting way more pissed off about things than I should have. I wasn't training in Jiu Jitsu at all. At that point, I'd wrestle a lot. I'd box the Marine Corps like recreational, but I just like never a good outlet. But really, the biggest thing I couldn't get happy. I was financially independent. I had, relationship was fine. Like everything was good. And I had every reason to be happy and I wasn't. I'm like, this is stupid. So I went, I was just going to go through a regular, so I contacted my regular provider or whatnot because I have like TRICARE. And they tried to help, but just wasn't a good connection. And no offense to them. It's like, but when you're talking to, I don't know, it's that I think, not that I'm special, but I think that I didn't have time to explain to them my life and then go over it. It was because I didn't know what was going on. And so, it just didn't work out. And then I was just sitting there one day. So I called, a couple things go on. And fortunately, no suicide ideation, nothing like that. But I've definitely got to a point in my life where I'm just like, man, I don't really care what happens at this point. And not like I want to go run my car into a wall, but it's just like, I'm not happy. What the hell's going on? So,
almost just kind of ambivalent to things.
Exactly. And I really thought, stupidly, that this is why I think mental health and like training is so important. It's like, some people can do it, I guess. They'll just mature. They'll just normally adjust or acclimate. I didn't. You know what I'm saying? But I acclimated enough. I look like I'm quacking like a duck. I'm walking like a duck, but I do not feel like a duck. So anyway, I know a lot of people have had problems with the VA, but this is awesome. So I call like this non-emergency line. And this is a short period of time. I try to talk to this other counselor. It's not going, whatever else. I'll be honest with you, it frustrated me a little bit. But I remember getting mad at them, not yelling or whatever else, but going like, this is just stupid. I shouldn't have said it like that. I just expected them to be able to wave a magic wand and fix me, and it didn't. And I was like, damn. So I called this non-emergency line in VA, and it was funny because I talked to one person, and within 2 hours, I was talking to the head. Her name's Dr. Cauldron. She's the head of the PTSD unit, I think. Hold on. Yeah, the PTSD unit. I'm trying to think either in San Diego or whatever else. But because the first person I talked to was just like taking an intake, and I was very upfront. I said, hey, look, I don't not have any suicide ideations. I would tell you if I am. I'm just not happy. And it was interesting because this other person happened to be a Marine, and they just working at the VA or whatnot. So we're just chatting along, and he's like, she was a Marine, and then the second guy was an Army dude, Army medic. She's like, hey, let me switch you over. So the psych tech dude gets on, and he starts asking me some questions. They were all super cool. It wasn't it was just a cool conversation. Because at that point, I was just like, I want help, but I also was like, I don't want anybody freaking out. Nobody needs to send 911 over here. I just, and then at the end of the day, so he pulled me up my record, and he goes like this. He goes, how many times do you deploy? And I go, 10. And he goes, how many combat deployments? And I said, technically 5. And he goes, okay. And then I don't ever oversell that because I know a ton of people that have way more resume than that. But what happened with me was all my deployments got progressively worse, especially worse, meaning just scarier. And then more intense as they went on. My last one being just frightening. Anyway, so I start talking. So anyway, we go through this. We had this cool conversation. Her and him we're all in the conversation. We're all having this party call. And then he goes, hey, let me do some stuff. He goes, I'll call you back today. I totally didn't think he would. He calls me back and he's like, hey, I got Dr. Cauldron here. She'd like to talk to you. And so she's asking me some questions. And she goes, hey, now I'll call you by your rank or whatnot, which is weird. Chief Warrant Officer. So I'm like, Ricky's fine. she's like, hey, this is what, here's a quick diagnosis. She like straight was like, hey, it looks like, got a lot of anxiety, this, that, and the other. And it was funny because just with a little information, she hit it with the nail right on the head, because 4 months later with the psychologist I was working with was exactly, she was that good, but she was just like, progressively, worse. The older you got more fear, and like, that's what you're exhibiting. And, she goes, I have this PTSD clinic I'd like to put you in. And I said, I'm not afraid of saying I have PTSD. I don't think that I have that, because what I think I have is I just didn't adjust well. I don't have the same, like, I don't have night terrors. I sleep fine, all this other stuff. So she goes, I understand. A lot of vets feel like you. That's fine. But if you do this, this probably help you. So I went through this PTSD clinic, which was essentially 4 months of a weekly, phone or video conference with one of their psychologists. And it was hard because you had homework, and I had to really that's the first time I've really had to really soul search. And you got to really, because I wanted to do the work. I think sometimes I'd been to therapy at time, counseling from time to time throughout the Marine Corps, not too much or whatnot. And not that I ever didn't want to put the work in, but like this time I'm like, I got to fix this, because I wasn't 50 yet, but I'm like, man, I can't be in my late 40s driving a cool car, doing whatever I want to do and be miserable. And I just started jiu-jitsu, and the anxiety blew up. Oh my God. So, every week we would talk, and I keep running, but it was homework and just having to think about stuff, and it was frustrating.
And having multiple guests now who have talked about their mental health journey coming out of the military, and one of the key things is everybody's different. You hit on a great point. You were sensing a little bit of it in the sense that, hey, I just can't seem to get happy.
Right.
I'm sleeping okay. I'm not, but at the same token, that's the most important thing to acknowledge is that PTS doesn't manifest itself the same way for everyone. And just because you aren't waking up in the middle of the night screaming, doesn't mean you're not suffering from it.
No, I agree with that. I can only speak for myself, not other veterans. I just think that sometimes, it just because somebody has, goes through combat, look at our cops and everybody that's like the type of job you have, everybody, there's a lot of stress and very real danger. I don't necessarily think that manifests itself PTSD with everybody. So when I had that conversation with the VA, but they quickly were like, kind of like you just said, like, hey man, you have to look at it like this. I think, look, if you're a guy, or it doesn't make a difference. If you're an aggressive war fighter, or you're just an aggressive person that goes out, you're a winner, you want to do things. I think at one point in your life, you may just get to where things just don't make sense. And that's what happened with me. Like, things just didn't make sense.
And it's good that you acknowledged it, and at least, didn't try to ignore it. It's like, okay, I see where you're coming from. The type A in us says, oh, I'm fine. I'm just not happy. But the thing is that address it when it's a small problem as opposed to letting it get bigger.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I don't know if I would have liked, if it wasn't for jiu-jitsu, I don't think I would have, I would not be anywhere near on some warrior monk journey. I wouldn't be as far as I am. But if it wasn't for that, because I was having these situations, and it made me quit my job. I just didn't want to work there anymore. And I turned over operations at the Wingman Foundation. I just wasn't, like I said, wasn't happy. And I started doing jiu-jitsu, and I sucked at it like everybody else, and it was just, I couldn't breathe. I thought I had asthma. I thought, like, you could hear me on, like, when I first started rolling, it was like you just hear one person breathing so hard in the room. Like, I thought I was like, I am broken. So that it's a good thing, but the jiu-jitsu exacerbated or really, really showcased how much anxiety I was having.
What did you? So obviously we've all been there and damn near hyperventilating when we're first starting because we're not breathing properly.
I did that at Pans. I straight up had an anxiety attack in Little Pans. I got tapped in front of Andre Galvo. Everybody, Jonnatas, great, my coach, Jonnatas, like the whole world's watching me, and I get mad. The guy was good. I'm not going to take away from him. Just like Andre said, you were winning until you weren't, because I just something happened and like switched over or whatnot. It caused me to go get up with a mental coach and come back and win it the next year. But yeah, that's the worst has happened to me. And that's kind of the reason I'm not afraid to fail now. But yeah, it's horrible. It's debilitating.
But do you think part of it was the anxiety issues you were dealing with related to the military? Because every one of us has gone through that early stages of jiu-jitsu where it's like, oh my God, there's somebody smashing me. I can't take this.
It would still, So my jiu-jitsu fear there, yes, that was definitely wrapped up in there for sure. So I don't want to say that it wasn't a factor. But I will say, I mean, ATOS is a shark tank. So I'm used to just getting smashed by like literally the best in the world. But so, and I was still younger in my career at that point. So no, I do remember very specifically that one being because I had ran my first 2 opponents. I'd gotten through them. It wasn't like boom, boom, boom. And Jonnatas Gracie he's been my coach since like I was a zero stripe white belt. He's looking at me across, and I remember I was starting to breathe and I was starting to get up. Like I was starting to have a little bit. I just didn't really. It just came out like nowhere, right? And he saw it. He goes, and he even told me afterwards, like saw it. And then I was good. I had good position, whatever else, got whatever else, and then I just, and then I got flipped. But so no excuse. The guy won. He's jamming. But that specifically was I could go back to the anxiety from like the type of fear I was feeling in the military because for example, I take, a lot of Epsom salt baths, or I try to. I had never had a problem like laying down completely in the bath, like, submerging myself or whatever else. I got to the point where I wasn't able to do that anymore. I had to instantly set up. Like I was never like that. Air crew swim call, you get turned all over the place. So all of these things were different for me. So I knew that there was a problem, and it didn't relate, but it did. Those specific things, my ability not to breathe well and freak out under pressure, other than your normal jiu-jitsu stuff, really was that anxiety stuff.
And you talked about going through a 4-month program with the VA and the doctor. Mm-hmm. And then you also mentioned after that match where you kind of hyperventilated, you went and talked to a mental health coach.
Oh yeah. So Kate Allgood, she works at Quantum Performance here in San Diego. She's great. She is a Canadian Olympic level hockey player. She is, not a real big person, but this is how I describe Kate. She is super smart, quietly fierce, like just a typical Canadian. But so I started after that. I went to Master Worlds. I lost in the first round of Master Worlds, but I ran into the guy that actually ended up being the final. So I just ran into a bigger hammer. So that wasn't so much of an issue. But I knew, I was like, man, fighting's metal, duh. But you really don't understand that until you can understand that, So I started working with Kate, and it was mental. Anybody's ever done the mental performance stuff, you have to start working on, mindfulness. You have to like the loop. A couple examples. Jonnatas says this quite, he says this a few times. Is the most important time in a match is the 4 or 5 minutes before the match. That's where you're going to win or lose it. And it really is true. If you can't keep that loop going, and it really is like, also like you have these, if this happens, what then? Meaning anybody who competes, probably it's the same thing. Like you're walking into the year I won Pans. I was this is no kidding. I came back the next year. I don't want to go transient with this. But also I'll talk about Kate for a second. So we started working on all this other stuff, started doing the drills, and I'm not going to say it didn't make sense at first, but it's hard. It's like when you first start doing things that aren't familiar, like, yeah, meditating is going to help, whatever. But you really start running these loops, and I start running these loops at ATOS and whatnot. And if it wasn't for that, I went back the following year. I went back by myself. It was just me, like solo. There's ATOS guys, because Pans is a huge thing. So I remember, because I was a blue belt, it was late the last day when all the black belts and master blue belts are going. So it's me and the best in the world. So anyway, I'm on one side, and I lose my match, my first match in my weight class, because I thought I didn't understand the point. Like I made a mistake. I thought I'd cleared his guard, and I didn't. I looked right at the thing and I saw 2, and I thought that was mine. Never make that mistake again. Andre was so mad because I didn't have a coach. He's like, "That's why you have a coach." I'm like, anyway, so I couldn't believe it. I went up in the stands, and I was just like, but fortunately there was that many. So I medaled. So I was able to go into the open. So I made it to the absolute. But I was sitting there, and I remember thinking, this is not okay. Because when you have like like whatever else, your teammates are going to be there for you or whatever else, and they're going to be like, I'm like, I didn't want to go over there. I didn't want to go get my bronze medal. I didn't want to go over to my teammates and them go like whatever, because this is what I learned. If you have a gold medal, it doesn't require a story. Silver and everything else requires what happened. Gold medals require no explanation. But I was mad at myself. So I went through the absolute division like a buzzsaw. But anyway, my finals was this guy he's the Mongolian judo national judo team. His whole team from Mongolia was out there. It was great people. I'd never really met people from Mongolia, but he tossed me into next week. Fortunately, I was able to wrestle through that, catch it, and finish the match. But yeah, if it wasn't for working with Kate, going back to it. I'm not kidding. As I was driving over there in the afternoon, I was just like, I could just tell people I got a flat. I could just whatever else. All of those things go through your head. I mean, I couldn't have been more trained. I was ready to go. And I'm sitting out there in my car. I'm like, I could just leave. And I had to run one of those loops to force myself to go in there. And then, I get up my fight and then I lose my match. And then I had to run another loop. But if I had done that training with Kate, or like been on this, like I said, warrior monk journey or whatnot, I wouldn't have been able to pull that off. I would have folded, I think. And it sucks to say, but now I won't.
And is running that loop basically your kind of daily fix now, or?
Well, yeah. Well, I think
just for life in general,
it's almost automatic now. Like I'm a lot happier now. I'm generally, now that I'm a little bit more like, I don't know, not deep, but I try to be a little bit more self-reflective. I'm like, why can't I get up in the morning and just be happy? Why do I have to go do something to be happy? So it's more my loop now is my job. I mean, I call myself, I'm a self-sponsored Jiu Jitsu fighter, right? So like that's my job. I train 10 times in a 7-day period. And I run like our pros do. They train a little bit more or whatnot. But I have fun with it. Like it's my game. I mean, it's real to me. I want to win. I'm not happy that I lost this weekend, but I'm happy that I had the experience. It's only going to make me better. And that's, and I really mean that. Like, right. But you have to, like, I think people, I won't speak to other people. I know that I have to go out and fight other people that are not from my gym for me to improve. I have to. So,
what's the long-term goal for this warrior monk journey that you're on? What are you hoping for?
I haven't really thought about that. My goal, I'll be a black belt someday. I mean, I just will keep training and keep going through it. I want to compete at every level, and I want to we're going to go to Brazil. We're going to go to Euros this next year. I want to, and then the next following year, Brazil. So in terms of just like the warrior, like just say like, competition training stuff, I'm going to take that as far as I can. I'm going to keep, and then just keep training. And then the monk part is like, I had 16 months left on my GI Bill. So I just went back to college. So now I'm just like, and I'm just taking the arbitrary because I have to declare another major or whatnot. So now I'm just, a basic business degree. And then if that class makes sense or whatever else. So I think the learning part is my ultimate goal. Because eventually, I think I'll always be able to train to a certain degree, but there's going to be times where I'm going to be spending more time on the wall because I'm resting or whatnot. And I always want to be thinking about something. I want to be present, but not to the point where I'm like worrying about stuff. Because I think I think it's easy to become a warrior, especially if you're in charge in the military or whatnot, because you're always thinking about stuff. I don't want to worry about anything. I just want to but I want to have a really deep understanding of a lot of things around me, and that's, I think, my ultimate goal.
Now, you and I are obviously not the same age. I've got quite a few years on you, but when you think about your longevity, what changes are you making to keep your training going as far as taking care of your body?
Well, I did stem cells earlier this year. So that was great for like I think a lot of people, they don't really not familiar with it, but what it comes down for stem cells, obviously you got like 500,000 in your body. And what they do is they put 150 million in you and they run wild in you. I use this as an example because some people will get it injected right into a joint through PRP process. I didn't really have any injuries per se, so it's just an IV. But this is a good analogy. It's like if you have a platoon in the Marine Corps that's been out, I'm 51 years old, been deployed for 51 years. These guys can beat up like whatever else, and then you send the entire Marine Corps to reinforce them for 20. That's what happens. Physically, I feel a ton better. I can definitely feel a difference. But the biggest thing I've noticed from the stem cells is my mind's on fire. Like I just think better. I think that's been coming along better just because of the warrior monk journey. My mind's adjusting better, like just the mental health exercises or whatever that I'm doing. But there's no doubt that helps. And then I don't drink. I quit Marine Corps. We're professional drinkers. We like to party quite a bit, but I knew when I got out, that was something I wanted to leave behind. So I haven't drank alcohol in years. I don't miss it per se. Or even in like the environments or whatever else, but there is no way I could train anywhere near as hard as I train it, even if I drank a little bit. So,
did you have to go out of the country for the stem cells?
Yep, I went down to Tijuana because I lived down in Otay Ranch, Chula Vista. So essentially, the places where I went, CPI Cellular Performance Institute. It's pretty well known. It's where a lot of the fighters go. Andre went down there before ADCC, and Sean O'Malley just got his stuff done. I wanted to go through like a tier 1 fighter protocol to see what that was like, and it was worth every bit. But yeah, it was essentially, it's Plaz de Tijuana. It's 25 minutes from my house. So I just drove down there every day and got my stuff. It's a 5-day protocol. But yeah, so stem cells, nutrition, I stay hydrated. I do all the things people say you're supposed to do. Get 8 hours of sleep, drink water, stay away from alcohol. I still eat garbage. I like tacos. I mean, I love hot dogs. I eat hot dogs like 3 times a week. I'm like, so.
Well, you just said the thing is you do everything you're supposed to do, which any fitness instructor, whatever you want to talk, says to do this. When you don't have a 40-hour-a-week job on top of it to try to mix in.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing, too. That's why I want to talk about my teammates. Like I love my teammates at ATOS. They help me so much. So I don't. And I'm very grateful for that. And I watch these guys drag, guys and girls, like drag themselves in after a week of like 40, 50 hours a week. A lot of them have kids or whatnot. And now they're dealing with a monster like me. I mean, I say that humbly because, I walk around like 235 pounds and I've been resting all day. I'm ready. These guys.
I'm like itching to go.
Yeah. I mean, but I talk to them all the time. And like I said, I am very grateful for my life. I've programmed it this way and I'm taking advantage of what I've been able to do. I'm going to say this humbly. I'm trying to build a superhuman. I really want to see how far I can take this and be a super good guy in the process while I'm doing it.
Well, I wish you the best with it.
Yeah, man.
How can people get in touch with you if they have any more questions?
On Instagram, pretty easy to find, Ricky Savage. I'm always at ATOS Jiu Jitsu, things like that. But yeah, I appreciate coming on the podcast. I would tell everybody this, that anybody that's going to transition out of the military, understand that you came in as a civilian. You have to when you come back out, you're going to have to act like a civilian again. And sometimes we just don't know how much we've changed. And if you're having issues or whatever else, don't think you're screwed up, but look at yourself first and understand that you're just may just still have those points on you and you're too edgy. I had to knock those things off.
I appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.